Thank you for choosing NTI for your pre-trip video. My name is Lee Woods. I'm the CDL program supervisor. You're about to see a detailed step-by-step on how to do your pre-trip inspection.
Hi, I'm Bill Waters, one of the instructors here at NTI. In order to do your pre-trip properly, you have to follow certain steps and you have to go in a certain prescribed series or sequence. It makes it easier to remember it and to memorize the parts that have to be memorized. You have in order at the DMV, they grade you on a point schedule. The more points you accumulate on your pre-trip inspection, the better you are. You need to maximize the pointage there in order to move on to your next step, which would be your maneuvers.
Hi, my name is Jameson Brown. I'm a recent graduate of NTI, and I'm going to show you the actual steps of what you need to do to complete your pre-trip. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to step back from the truck, and I'm going to look under the truck to make sure there's no puddles. So, nothing there, so we're good to go. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that my truck's not leaning anyway, so that way I'm checking for suspension problems to make sure, again, there's no issues there and the truck's not leaning left or right. Next thing I'm going to do is I'll check my lights as I come to them. So the first step of actually checking what I'm going to do is I'm going to check my license plate. Make sure that the license plate is present, it's properly mounted and secured, and then I'm going to move up to my bumper, make sure my bumper is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken. Then I'm going to check my fog lights. Fog lights are properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked, bent, or broken, they're clear in color. Then I'm going to step up to my headlights. My headlights are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. They're clean and clear. Then I'll go to my turn signals. The turn signals are amber in color. They're properly mounted and secured. They're clean and working properly. Then I'm going to move to my grill. Make sure the grill is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. And then I'm going to come over here and check my fender mirror bracket. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Then I'm going to check the actual mirror itself. Make sure the mirror is properly mounted and secured. It's clean, it's clear, it's not cracked, broken. And then from there, I'm going to check my hood. Make sure the hood's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. So then next thing I'm going to do after the hood is I'm going to check my windshield. Make sure my windshield is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, it's not bent or broken anyway. And then I'm also going to make sure that there's no illegal stickers that would impede my vision. And then you can see the black weather stripping. That's going to be the next part we're going to check. We're going to make sure that that's not cut, torn, or frayed, and it's properly mounted and secured. From there, I'm going to go around and check my hood latches and then open the hood for the next part of the pre-trip.
And then we're going to check our hood latches. We want to make sure that those are latching and unlatching properly.
So the last thing we'll do before we open the hood is we'll check the clearance lights at the very top. You can see those there. Those are going to be amber in color. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken.
Now, using a 3-point stance, we want to go ahead and move back to the front of the truck and go ahead and lift the hood so that way we can move on to the next section of the pre-trip. The next section in the pre-trip is going to be the passenger side. There are 3 major components that we're going to be checking, all of which are belt driven. The belt can have no more than 3/4 inch of play, and of course you need to check the belt to make sure that it's not cut, torn, or frayed. The first component that we're going to check is going to be the AC compressor. We're going to check to make sure it's properly mounted and secured. We make sure that we check the hoses and lines coming off of the AC compressor. We need to check to make sure that they are not cut, torn, or frayed, and there's no leaks from the hoses or the AC compressor itself. From there, we're going to move down and check the alternator. Alternator should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. We're going to check the lines on those. It has electrical lines. Make sure that those are not cut, torn, or frayed. From there, we move down to the water pump. Water pump should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. We also need to check the lines and hoses on there. Make sure that they are not leaking, that they're not cut, torn, or frayed. And lastly, of course, you need to check to make sure the water pump itself is not leaking. Now we're going to move over to our driver's side, which is our reservoir family. The first reservoir we're going to check is our coolant reservoir. We need to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. The reservoir itself is not leaking, and we need to check to make sure that the cap is present and secure. We also need to check the lines and hoses that come from the coolant reservoir and make sure that they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cut, torn, or frayed. From there, we're going to check our windshield washer reservoir. We need to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. We need to check the reservoir itself to make sure it's not leaking. Then we also need to check the lines and hoses from it to make sure that those are properly mounted and secured and that they're not cut, torn, or frayed. Last reservoir that we're going to check is our power steering reservoir. Need to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It also is going to have lines and hoses. We need to make sure that those are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And make sure that the reservoir itself and the hoses are not leaking. We also need to check our oil dipstick to make sure that it's present. And we need to check the filler tube to make sure that it has the cap is present, and that oil dipstick filler tube is not leaking. Now we're going to move on to our steering family. The first thing we want to check is the steering column. You need to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And from there we're going to check the U-joints. The U-joints are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. The U-joints connect to the gearbox. The gearbox is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And you need to make sure the gearbox is not leaking. The gearbox will connect to your pitman arm. The pitman arm is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken. The pitman arm also connects to the drag link. It connects to it through a castle nut and Cotter pin. The drag link you need to check to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's going to connect to your upper steering arm. The upper steering arm and the drag link are connected with another castle nut and Cotter pin. You need to make sure those are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. As well as you need to check the upper steering arm to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured and it's not cracked, bent, or broken. Then you have your lower steering arm. That needs to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's going to connect to your tie rod with another castle nut and Cotter pin. You need to make sure that they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And of course you need to make sure the tie rod itself is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Now that we've done our steering family, we need to move on to our suspensions. First thing you're going to check is going to be your spring hanger. You need to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Then we're going to check the leaf springs. Make sure those are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. They're also, you need to make sure that they're not shifting. Next, we check our U-bolt. The U-bolt should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And then we check the saddle. The saddle should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. The last thing on the suspension that we're going to check is going to be our shock absorbers. Shock absorbers should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. We also need to check the bushings on the shock absorbers to make sure that those are not cut, torn, or frayed, and there's no visible leaks present on the shock absorber. So we're going to move on to our brakes. First thing on the brakes you need to check are your brake lines and brake hoses. You need to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked, bent, or broken, and that there's no leaks coming from them. Next, we're going to move to the brake chamber. Brake chamber should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. You also want to make sure that the brake chamber is not leaking as well. Next, we're going to check our push rod, slack adjuster, and Cotter pin. You need to make sure that the Cotter pin is present and that the push rod and slack adjuster are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. And on your slack adjuster, you need to make sure that there's no more than 1 inch of pull on the slack adjuster. From there, we're going to move down to our brake drums. Brake drums should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And then finally, we're going to check our brake pads or brake shoes. You need to make sure that there's no moisture present, that of course the brake pads and brake shoes are present themselves, and that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And you have to have at least 1/4 inch of thickness on your brake pads. From the brakes, we're going to move on to our wheels and tires. The first thing that we're going to check is going to be our tire sidewalls. We want to make sure that there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts on the tire. We also need to make sure that the tire is properly beaded to the rim. It's very important that you check your tread depth. The tread depth on your steer tires must be at least 4/32. On the rim itself, we also want to check that it's properly mounted and secured, that there's no illegal welds, and that it's not cracked, bent, or broken. You need to check your lug nuts. Lug nuts should be properly secured. They should have no rust trails, which should indicate looseness. And we also want to check the valve stem on the tire. Make sure the valve stem is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's not leaking. The pressure in the tire should be from 80 to 100 psi's. And we also need to check our hub seal. Hub seal should be filled to manufacturer specs and should not be leaking and should not be cracked, bent, or broken. Now we're going to move on to the side of the truck or the side wall of the truck. First thing we want to check is our mirror bracket. You need to make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Then you have to check your mirrors themselves. The mirrors should be clean, they should be clear, and of course not cracked, bent, or broken. Next, we want to check the door, make sure that it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and that the door itself is properly secured. Now we're going to check our door latch, make sure that it latches and unlatches properly. With that, you also want to check your hinges. Make sure the hinges are properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And typically we want to go ahead and pull up on the door to make sure that the hinges are holding properly. After you check the latch on the door, you want to go ahead and open that up and check the weather stripping on the inside of the door, your door seal, to make sure that that is not cut, torn, or frayed, and that it's properly mounted and secured. Now you want to check your steps. You want to check to make sure that there's no illegal welds, that the steps are free of debris, and you need to step up on them to actually prove that it holds your weight. From there, we want to check our fuel tank. We want to make sure the fuel tank is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. There's no illegal welds. And of course, you do need to check your fuel cap. With this, you want to take the fuel cap off, show that the chain is present, and show that the seal on the inside of the fuel cap is present, it's not cut, torn, or frayed, and that it's functioning properly. Go ahead and replace the fuel cap, and then from there we're going to actually check our emergency equipment on the side compartment door. Want to go ahead and open that up. You're going to have your fire extinguisher, which should be properly mounted and secured. Has to be filled to at least 10 BC, and which would be filled to manufacturer specs. And you also want to check your reflective triangles. Make sure your reflective triangles are present, they're properly mounted and secured, and they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And lastly, on the sidewall, you want to check your blinker. Make sure that the blinker is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and of course the blinker on the side is going to be amber in color. Now that we've checked the side of the truck, we're going to go ahead and move on to the rear of the cab. The first thing that you want to check is your reflective tape. You want to make sure that it's present and that it's properly mounted and secured. Now we're going to check our work handles. We want to make sure that the work handles are properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked, bent, or broken. You also want to check all your rivets. You want to make sure the rivets are present and that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. From there, we're going to move down and check our glad hand dummy housing. You want to make sure that those are free of debris, that they're not cracked, bent, or broken, and that they are properly mounted and secured. You also want to make sure that you check your work light, which will be clear in color. You want to make sure that it's clean and that it's not cracked or broken. You need to check your exhaust stacks. You want to check those to make sure that they're properly mounted and secured, that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And you also need to make sure that you check for soot trails that would indicate any sort of leaks coming from the exhaust stack. Now we'll move down to the very bottom and we'll check our airbags and shocks. You want to make sure that the airbags and shocks are properly mounted and secured, that they're not leaking. And on the shocks, they do have bushings, so you'll want to check to make sure that the bushings are not cut, torn, or frayed, and of course that the shock itself is not leaking. Now we'll move on to our catwalk. Catwalk, you want to make sure it's free of debris, it's properly mounted and secured. You want to check that there's no illegal welds, and that of course the catwalk is not cracked, bent, or broken. With the catwalk, you're also going to have your steps to get up there, and with that you want to check again to make sure that it's free of debris, that it'll hold your weight, that it's properly mounted and secured, and that it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and free of illegal welds. Now you want to check the actual frame of the truck. You want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, all bolts are present, it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and again that there's no illegal welds. Now we're going to check our drive shaft. Drive shaft is going to have U-joints on either end. You want to make sure that the drive shaft and the U-joints are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. On this particular truck, the battery box is underneath the catwalk. We want to make sure that the battery box is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is holding our batteries and that it's properly mounted and secured. You also want to check your splash guards. Splash guards should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. From there, we're going to check the mud flaps on the back of the truck. Make sure that the mud flaps have your DOT tape. The DOT tape is properly mounted and secured, as well as the mud flap should be properly mounted and secured, not cut, torn, or frayed, or cracked, bent, or broken. We need to check our tail lights, which are going to be red in color. They should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. You're also going to have a reverse light. The reverse light should be clear in color, and you want to make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's also very important that you check the spacing between the truck and the landing gear to make sure that you have adequate spacing. Now we're going to go ahead and check our coupling system. First thing you want to check are your airlines. You're going to have two airlines. You want to make sure that those are properly mounted and secured, that they're not cut, torn, or frayed. You also have your trailer glad hand housing. You need to check that to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured. It's going to have a rubber grommet. You need to make sure that that grommet is not cut, torn, or frayed. It's going to be your rubber seal. You're also going to have an electrical line. You need to make sure that the electrical line is properly mounted and secured and that it's not cut, torn, or frayed. You also need to check the actual connection itself to make sure that there's no debris inside and that the prongs and pins on there are not cracked, bent, or broken. Now we can move down to our fifth wheel. First thing we want to check is going to be our platform. You need to make sure the platform is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Then you're going to have your fifth wheel slide. You need to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. You're also going to have your pivot pin and Cotter pin. You need to make sure the Cotter pin is present and that it's securing the pivot pin and that the pivot pin is properly mounted and secured, and you want to make sure that it's not cracked, bent, or broken. Now we're going to move to our release bar or our safety latch. You need to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured and that it's secured in the engaged position. Now we're going to move on and check our locking jaws. Locking jaws need to be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and you want to make sure that they are secured around your kingpin. Lastly, we're going to check our skid plate. We're going to check the skid plate to make sure that it's properly greased, so that way you don't have any issues when turning. You also want to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And lastly, you want to check to make sure that there's no light or spacing between your skid plate and your apron. And then you want to check the apron itself to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, that it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And of course, you want to be able to check your kingpin. The kingpin should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Now that we've done our coupling, we're going to move down to our wheels and tires for the second axle. First thing we want to check is to make sure that the tire sidewalls, that there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. We need to make sure that the tires are properly beaded to the rim. And again, like I said before, tread depth is extremely important. So on your second axle, you need to make sure that you have at least 2 30-seconds tread depth. From there, we're going to move down to the rim. We want to make sure that the rim is properly mounted and secured, that there's no illegal welds, and that the rim itself is not cracked, bent, or broken. Also on the rim, we're going to check our lug nuts. We want to make sure that the lug nuts are all present, they're properly mounted and secured, and you need to check for rust trails that would indicate any sort of looseness on the lug nuts. Now we'll check our valve stem. The valve stem should be properly mounted and secured, not cut, torn, or frayed, and that there's no leaks coming from it. We're going to check the pressure on our tires. We need to have at least 80 to 100 psi's on the tires. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and check our hub seal. Hub seal should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And on your dual tires, you always have to check to make sure that you have proper spacing between the tires and that there's no debris in between the tires themselves. Next up is going to be our brakes. First thing you always want to check on your brakes is going to be your lines and hoses. You want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured and that they're not cut, torn, or frayed, and of course that they're not leaking. Then we're going to move to the brake chamber. Brake chamber should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and there should be no leaks coming from the brake chamber. Now we're going to check our push rod, slack adjuster, and Cotter pin. We need to make sure that the Cotter pin is present and that the push rod and slack adjuster are not cracked, bent, or broken, and that they are properly mounted and secured. Now we're going to do the brake drum. Brake drum should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And then finally, we're going to check our brake shoes or brake pads. They should be properly mounted and secured. All of them should be present. There can't be any moisture on them, and you have to have at least 1/4 inch of thickness on those. Now we're going to check the suspensions for the second axle. First thing you want to check is your spring mount. Spring mount should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Then you want to check your leaf springs. Make sure the leaf springs are properly mounted and secured, that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And on these, you need to make sure that they're not shifting. You also want to be able to check your U-bolts. U-bolts should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's going to hold down your saddle. The saddle should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Now we're going to check our shock absorbers. Again, the shock absorbers do have bushings, so you want to check those bushings, make sure that they are not cut, torn, or frayed. On the shock absorber, you want to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, and that it's not cracked, bent, or broken, and of course that it's not leaking. Now you also will have airbags on the second suspension, so you need to check those to make sure that they're properly mounted and secured, that they're not cut, torn, or frayed, and that they are not leaking as well.
I will now inspect my trailer. The front of my trailer has a header board, which is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It has rivets, all of which are present, properly mounted and secured. I have clearance lights, which are properly mounted and secured. They are amber in color, and they're not cracked or broken. The side of my trailer has DOT tape, which is properly mounted and secured, none of which is cut, torn, or frayed. I have blinkers, which are properly mounted and secured. They are amber in color. I also have marker lights, which are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. They're also amber in color. The underside of my trailer, I have my landing gear. My landing gear is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It has a handle, which is properly mounted and secured and is engaged in the cradled position. I have cross members under my trailer, which are all properly mounted and secured, none of which are cracked or broken. And I have my sliding tandem hoses. They're not cut, torn, or frayed, and they're at least 18 inches from the ground. I have my sliding tandem. My slide itself is properly mounted and secured. All bolts are present. There's no illegal welds. I have a locking pin. The pin itself is properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's in the engaged position. I have stopping blocks, which are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. And I have a release handle. The handle is also in the engaged position. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. My trailer has 4 sets of tires. I will inspect each tire as I inspect this one. The tire itself is free of any abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no debris between my tires. The tire is properly beaded to the rim. It has a tread depth of no less than 2/32 of an inch. The rim itself is properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. It's free of any illegal welds. My lug nuts are properly mounted and secured. They're free of rust trails, which would indicate looseness. I have a valve stem. The valve stem is properly mounted and secured. It has a cap, which is present. My hub seal is properly mounted and secured, and my tire is between 80 and 100 psi. I have 4 sets of brakes. I will inspect each of them as I inspect this set. I have brake lines and hoses, which are properly mounted and secured. They're not cut, torn, or frayed, free of any audible leaks. I have my brake chamber, properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, free of any illegal welds. I have a push rod, slack adjuster, and cotter pin. They're all properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. The push rod has no more than 1 inch of play. I have my brake drums, properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. And then I have my liners, which are free of any moisture, and they're no less than 1/4 of an inch thick. I have 4 sets of suspension, and I will inspect each of them as I inspect this one. I have a spring mount. That mount is properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. I have leaf springs, which are not shifting, not missing, not cracked or broken. I have U-bolts that are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, which hold down my saddle. The saddle itself is properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. I have shock absorbers, properly mounted and secured, with bushings on each side, which are not cut, torn, or frayed. There's no audible leaks. And I also have airbags. Those airbags are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, free of any leaks. I will now inspect the back of my trailer. I have my DOT bumper, properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It has tape, which is properly mounted and secured, not cut, torn, or frayed. I have my license plate, properly mounted and secured. The bolts are present. The license plate light is clear in color. It's not cracked or broken. I have my brake lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. They're red in color. My doors are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. The hinges are all present, properly opening and closing. I have a seal around my door, which is not cut, torn, or frayed. My latches are properly opening and closing. They're not sticking. They're not cracked or broken. I have clearance lamps that are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. They're red in color. And I have more DOT tape, which is properly mounted and secured. It is all clean, none of which is cut, torn, or frayed.
Now we're going to begin our end cap. First thing we want to check is our emergency equipment. Want to go ahead and check to make sure that we have our fire extinguisher that's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Then we want to check our emergency triangles, the reflective triangles. Make sure those are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Then we also want to check to make sure we have our extra fuses. We want to make sure that those are present. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our chocks for the wheels, and we'll go ahead and chalk our tires so that way we can do our air brake test later on in the end cap process. Once we've chalked our tires, we want to go ahead and climb up into the cab of the truck, and we're going to start to check the items within the end cap. First thing we're going to check is our seat belt. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secured and that it's not cut, torn, or frayed. Then we want to actually put the seat belt on so that way we can check to ensure that it's latching and unlatching properly. From there, we're going to go ahead and perform our safe start, where we're going to turn the truck on and allow the air pressure to build up for the air brake test. Now that we have the truck on, we want to go ahead and begin checking our windows, driver's side and passenger side. Make sure they are clean, clear, that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. And of course, we want to check to make sure they are rolling up and down properly. Then we're going to check our mirrors. Mirrors, we want to make sure they are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and that they are clean and clear. Now we're going to check our horns. We have two different horns. We're going to first check our city horn, then we're going to go ahead and check our highway horn. After that, we want to check our steering wheel. For the steering wheel, we want to test to make sure that there is no more than 2 inches of play or 10 degrees of play in the steering wheel. After the steering wheel, we're going to move up to the windshield, check to make sure that it's clean, it's clear, it's not cracked or broken, and that there's no illegal stickers that would impede your vision. Then we're going to check our windshield wipers and the windshield washer fluid. We're going to go ahead and turn those on and turn on the water so that way we can test the windshield washer fluid. Now we'll go ahead and check our dashboard. We want to make sure that the dashboard is free of debris. And then moving down, we're going to go ahead and check our heater, our defrost, and our air conditioning. After that, we're going to go ahead and check our lights. The first thing we want to check is our headlights. Then we will check our high beams, make sure the light comes on indicating that the high beams are on. Then we're going to go ahead and check our turn signals. We're going to check left, we'll check right, and then we'll go ahead and check our four-way flashers. Now we'll begin checking our gauges. The first thing I'm going to check is my oil gauge. We're going to make sure that's in normal operational range. Then we will check our voltmeter. Voltmeter would be in normal operational range as long as it's showing between 12 and 14. We're going to also check our temperature gauge to make sure that the truck is not overheating and that it's in normal operational range. Now we will check our tachometer and speedometer during our 5-mile-an-hour test. Now we'll also check our gear shifter. We want to make sure the gear shift is moving freely, it's not getting stuck anywhere. And after that, we're going to go ahead and begin our air brake test. The first thing we want to do for the air brake test is go ahead and turn the truck completely off and then put the key back into the on position without turning the truck back on. Then we want to go ahead and push in our nozzles to go ahead and release the brakes. And the first part of the brake test is going to be our static test. What we're going to do is set a timer for 1 minute. During that 1 minute, we cannot lose more than 3 psi's in 1 minute. Go ahead and set your timer and begin that now. After your 1 minute timer is up, you want to read back and confirm the results, saying that it has now been 1 minute and I did not lose more than 3 psi's in that 1 minute. From there, you will move on to your apply brake test, in which you cannot lose more than 4 psi's in 1 minute. What you want to do is go ahead and place your foot on the brake. Once the air gauge has settled, then you want to go ahead and begin that test. So set your timer for 1 minute, and after that 1 minute's completed, you come back and again you confirm your results, letting the grader know that you did not lose more than 4 psi's in that 1 minute. Now we're going to go ahead and begin the low pressure test. What you want to do for your low pressure test is fan your brakes down between 60 and 40 psi's. At that point, your alarm and light should be going off, and you want to go ahead and confirm that with the grader. After your low pressure test, we're going to go ahead and do the emergency pop-out test, where we again will fan our brakes, but now we're going to fan them down between 40 and 20 psi's, at which point both of your brake nozzles should pop out. And typically what I will do is once I feel confident that the knobs have popped out, I will go ahead and continue to fan my brakes all the way down to 0, just to be sure. For the tug test, we want to go ahead and get out of the truck safely using our 3-point stance, so that way you can get your wheel chocks. Once you have your chocks, you'll go ahead and get back in the truck so you can perform a safe start and go ahead and begin rebuilding up your air pressure. Once your air pressure is built up to 125 or better, then you can go ahead and begin your tug test. Make sure that you push your trailer brakes in so that way it releases those. Then we're actually going to tug on the tractor. We will go ahead and pull the trailer knob out and push the tractor brake in. So that way it releases your tractor brakes but then engage as your trailer brakes. And you'll want to perform the same process over again. You're going to go ahead and put it in gear and then gently pull against the trailer to ensure that the trailer brakes are in fact holding. Once you've done those 2 steps, you've now completed your tug test. We're going to do the 5 mile per hour test. With this test, you're going to go ahead and put your tractor in gear, and at a slow pace of 5 miles per hour, you're going to go ahead and accelerate forward, holding your hands slightly above the steering wheel, and then you want to go ahead and brake. What you're going to do is you're going to look for the tractor shifting left or right, which would indicate an issue with your tractor. You have now completed your entire pre-trip and your end cap,